Sorry, my dog.
This happens all the time. There's always a dog moment.
All right, you can come in.
Actually, my cat was in here just a few minutes ago, and she was quite insistent because I'm the only one in the family who feeds her, it seems. And so I'm like the go-to. She comes to me whenever she needs me. And occasionally she comes in and kind of complains about the lack of attention from the others in terms of food, not in terms of other things. Okay, we're getting close to where we should be. I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. This is an incredible webinar on art in the pandemic and the responsibilities of art in our communities in answering to pandemic. And of course, the pandemic that we're dealing with tonight is not just COVID-19, but we're also dealing with a reminder of the compounding reminders of systemic racism and inequity that have started initially with this pandemic and has continued with some unprecedented violence that is now being responded to. So we are living in a time where artists have to speak to the signs of the times, as Nina Simone wrote and said in an interview at a critical time in the 60s. And I am so grateful tonight to have some leading scholars of literature and arts, and also art organizers and an artist to provide their own particular view of how we can respond and what are the responsibilities of the artists and what are the opportunities that art has now in this age of pandemic. It's my great delight to welcome Elizabeth Autka, who is the professor of English at the University of Richmond. One of the ways in which Elizabeth has proved to be timely as a writer is she published in 2019 a book called Viral Modernism, the Influenza Pandemic and the Interwar Literature with Columbia University Press. And this is a text that is worthy of study. It's incredibly thorough, and it's also incredibly accessible, and it's also been talked about in many different online magazines, as well as been reviewed favorably. Dr. Autka, thank you so much for taking time to be with us to discuss your work. We also have with us an incredible artist, Sabrina Nelson, who is a multimedia artist, though she can do just about anything, and you'll see some examples of her work. She somehow brings together issues of spirit, motion, intimacy. I would also say mourning and grief work is really powerful in her work most recently. And she is on the staff and faculty at CCS and at the DIA. We are also incredibly honored to have with us Wayne Brown, who is the president and CEO of the Michigan Opera Theater. Wayne was named president and CEO of the Michigan Opera Theater in 2014. He has been a director of music and opera for the National Endowment for the Arts since 1997, and he manages NEA grants for music and opera projects connected to the NEA Jazz Master Fellowships. Wayne, it is an honor to have you with us, and thank you so much. And then finally, we have with us Rachelle Riley, who is the Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit. This is a position that was unfilled for 20 years and now has been filled for the past year by you, Rachelle. We are so honored that you're here. I also want to say that Rachelle has recently published, or her book has recently been published as paperback, and you can also get it on Kindle on Amazon, called The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery. I've downloaded it recently, and I'll be asking a couple of questions from it to help get some of her ideas on the table. So Rachelle, thank you so much for being with us. I want to begin with a moment of prayer, just because so many of you are here, are people of faith, and because no matter where we are, no matter what we believe, if we're a person of goodwill, I think we're all aware right now that there's a power that's greater than we are, that's operating around us. And so I want to open ourselves to that power and to ask for help. And I'll do that in a conventional way, but if that doesn't work for you, you can maybe meditate in one way or another. So let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for the gift of this day and for the reminder that the sun shines, and we look forward to the light of your sun shining on this nation and on this community and on this beautiful city. We lift up before you all those who have been affected by this pandemic, for those who have experienced economic insecurity and are wondering how they're going to pick up the pace and somehow return to work and stay safe, for all those who have died, for their families who are mourning and still trying to pick up the pieces, for those who are sick, and for those who are somehow holding together the families and caring for them, and for the caregivers that are giving of themselves so selflessly so that they might get better, and for all of us who are working through a kind of effect of this pandemic in our lives as we are trying to find a way forward together. We also lift up for you all those who have been victims of violence, in particular George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and anyone else who has not had the same notoriety, but their names and their stories are known to God. And so we know that you are with them, God, and with their families. And we ask that you would help us to move into the moral awakening that you have invited to us as a nation, as a community, as a city. As we lift up all of these things, we ask as well for your blessing upon artists, for the work that they try to do, for the work that they feel called to do, for the sacrifices they make so that they can bear witness to you in one way or another, in one form or another, to one audience or another. Bless all artists. Let them be angels and messengers of your truth, of your justice, of your mercy, of your grace, and of your forgiveness. And as we begin this seminar, we ask that you would bless all who are here tonight, that this would be a time of refreshment and a time of renewal and a time of hope and a time of vision, so that we can walk together fully into the promises you have given us. These things we ask in your mighty name. Amen. We want to begin today with Elizabeth Autka, and I want to ask Dr. Autka, can you speak a little bit about how you came to see, almost with incredible prescience, the fact that there was an interconnection between modernity and how we understand the conditions we live in now and the 1918 to 1920 pandemic?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Bill. The project really began with a mystery for me, which I had spent years studying this period, this sort of early 20th century World War I, and all of the traumas that entailed. And when I started to learn about the 1918 influenza pandemic, which I hadn't really heard very much about, and I started to understand the scope of it, that it was 50 to 100 million people who died, that the United States lost more in that pandemic than we lost in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq combined. And I thought, well, that's not the way art works, right? How you cannot have that level of trauma, that much loss without having it show up in the art, right? That's just like art, that's what art does. And so it really began as this mystery. Where did it go? Because it had to be somewhere. And like a lot of obsessions, it started showing up everywhere. And sometimes it was covert and sometimes it was obvious. And but I found that because art is so good at telling particular stories, right? Stories about bodies, stories about emotions, about sensory, right? It tells a history of the senses, a history of emotions. And if you know the atmosphere of the pandemic and all of the sights and sounds and emotions that went along with it, you can start to see it show up in even works that I had known well and had not seen the pandemic in.
One of the things that I think is so incredible about what your book helps us to see is that when you look at the psychological studies of pandemics or the history of pandemics, one thing that people want more than anything else, and this is a huge pressure that we all have to recognize, is that people want to return back to the status quo. They want nothing so much as to go back to the way things were, because that was predictable and they understood and they know which way they were going. And yet, and there was a lot of that after the 1918, 1920 pandemic, but it was the artists who kept on testifying to what happened. It was only the artists who actually kept on reflecting on the trauma. In fact, churches became servants of the status quo, by and large, rather than part of the avant-garde. Is that a fair assessment of what you're finding?
Yeah, I would just make a few, add a few things to that. And one is that it didn't make it into the book, but there's a ton of changes made to the Episcopal prayer book in the 1920s. And some of those changes about how you can pray for the dead and how you pray towards people in illness, very much linked probably to the pandemic and World War I and the losses that so it slid in there. And then the other thing that really struck me in my research is that the individuals did not forget, right? So it slides into art and it slides out of a lot of cultural memory, the influenza pandemic. But the individual sufferers, one of the things that unites them, there's hundreds of letters at the Imperial War Museum in London written by flu survivors, and almost to a letter they say, I never forgot, right? It's like it was yesterday. I never forgot, I never forgot, I never forgot, I never forgot. And I interviewed one 105-year-old woman who had gotten the flu in the pandemic here in Richmond, and I asked her, so why do you think people forgot the flu? And she looked at me like I was crazy. Like, they're like, no, we didn't forget. But it is true that artists are often the place, and by artists I mean sort of all different types of artists, including the literature. They're the repositories of so much memory to make us remember what it was like, even to the point of reminding us what it meant to forget. Right, so some of these poems that I study are also about the process of forgetting something or having it sort of live in this sort of below the surface way.
You did an incredible survey of 20th century artists, and of course, what was the one artist, when you looked at their work through the lens of pandemic and trauma, opened up some new avenues into the meaning of their poetry, for example, or their prose? I'm thinking, for example, you have such an interesting review of like Willa Cather and her reflections on pandemic, but I'm wondering who was the one that truly surprised you?
I think that I was very surprised at a lot at T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and just a range of things, and some authors that I didn't know as well. But I think that the biggest the one that I felt the most nervous about, but then gradually came to be convinced by, was T.S. Eliot's The Second Coming, which is a very famous, really very much anthologized poem. This is the one that the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And that I had never read in, and I would have told you were nuts if you told me 5 years ago that this was a poem about the pandemic. And but that was the one that really that most dramatically shifted my thinking.
And it's Yeats's book, Yeats's poem, the Second Coming, and in it, yes, the center cannot hold. His pregnant wife nearly died of the flu before he writes this.
Right. So like most great pieces of art, right, that it's about many things, right, that there's not, you know, I think sometimes, is at least my students are sometimes tempted to see a work of art as a puzzle, right, and that you just need to uncover the one true meaning of it, and that's the way poetry, you know, or art works, and it's not. So it's a poem that's very much about a range of things. It's about human on human violence. It's about the war. It's about the revolutions that were going on. It's about England, what England was doing to Ireland at the time. So it's not just about one thing, but when you do learn that in the weeks before he writes the poem, his pregnant wife is dying of the flu, and so he's sort of watching as sort of his wife and unborn child are sort of slowly slipping away. She does end up surviving. Very few pregnant women who caught the flu survived. The death rates for pregnancy were extraordinary in this flu. And his muse, Maud Gunn, this beautiful Irish revolutionary, is downstairs hammering at the door, demanding to be let in, and the doctor's saying, no, your wife is going to die if this commotion sort of continues. So this is a horribly upsetting thing, and the poem really reflects both the sense, you know, Dublin is disintegrating with the flu, right? That there's all of the, you know, the doctors are sick, the nurses are sick, the priests are sick, the police force is sick, like everything is just, there's bodies stacked everywhere and coffins stacked everywhere. So there's just this sense of external society breakdown as well. And this is on the heels of the war. And then this kind of internal bodily breakdown, right, that is happening in the poem as well, which kind of reads like a delirious fever dream, a kind of nightmarish horror flick that a pregnant woman might have. And then there's a few things in the poem that suggest some of the more disturbing side effects of the flu or symptoms of the flu. This was a flu that you bled from the ears and the nose and the mouth. Often really, there was often a really dramatic amount of blood. You turned purple, and you most people died of the pneumonia that set in afterwards. This is this is a bacterial pneumonia in a time before antibiotics. And so people drowned in their beds. That's sort of millions and millions and millions of people are drowning in their beds. So lines like,
the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned.
That's right. Right. And
yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Right. This sort of this sense of drowning, and this sense of a tide so full of blood, right? This blood-dimmed tide. And then the passive voice construction of that, right? That the thing that's so freaking scary about this poem is that you can't see what's happening, right? So that the agent is hidden. So the blood-dimmed tide is loosed. Okay, well, what's loosening this blood-dimmed tide? The ceremony of innocence is drowned. Who's doing that drowning, right? Because that suddenly you have an invisible enemy that is in the air, that corrupts, and it's everywhere, and you know it's deadly, but you can't see it. And then in the final stanza, we have this sort of rough beast, who's also somewhat vague, slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. And so we have first war and then a kind of second coming of plague. which is, of course, you know, part of the story of Revelation, right? Is
Yeah.
part of what the second coming would involve would be war and pestilence. So
What's amazing about that, what you just said is, you know, pandemics are always about, you said something about pandemics are always involve multiple things. And I think that we can certainly testify to that where we are today when we think about the racial disparities and inequity that the pandemic reinforced in our minds. And maybe not to everybody's mind, but to the minds of, say, the wider society. And the other thing that you said that was really interesting to me is by picking on Yeats, I think of Yeats speaking as an Irish poet, writing in English, not the language he would choose, in which he is representing a people who are trying to establish some kind of territorial integrity, some kind of sense of self, and on a national scale. He was in many ways an outsider artist who is trying to somehow both command the language that he was using and yet speak his own truth, to use some modern words. Is that fair to say?
Yes, no, I think so. I mean, and certainly one of the things he's speaking of in this poem is the English black and tans, which were a sort of terrible military presence, and they had shot a pregnant woman with her child, who was just sitting on her stoop, and that sort of it's a huge amount of protests, right, erupted at that time. So sort of these kind of brutal displays of authoritarian power is something that he was writing about in a whole range of ways.
So in my last question for you before we segue is, in what ways have you learned, as you're studying this book, what insights does that give you to the pandemic that we face today?
It all seems eerily familiar, in a way that is, I feel sometimes like I'm in a B movie where, you know, it's about a writer who wakes up one morning and their book has come alive, right? It's not even a good movie. And so it's been uncanny in that way. But I will say that that one of the great things about the art is that it did give me a kind of map for navigating some of the horror and the uncertainty and this big thing of that I think we're just starting to grapple with now, of contagion guilt, right? The very fact that you can give somebody that you love this virus without meaning to, right? Like it's very difficult that's extremely difficult to confront. So and I have been inspired. I mean, we haven't gotten a lot of the art yet from COVID, and the way COVID and these very important protests are sort of interacting and showing us showing us again, right, and again and again and again, all of the sort of underlying racism, the underlying structural inequalities. And that's something certainly the 1918 pandemic did as well. So the art that comes out of this, there's a few poems that are really great, but that's going to be a huge help, I think, for us to start to process all that's happened in these months.
I think that's so true, because I find that again, what I've experienced as a pastor who was a college professor until returning to the parish 6 years ago, is I did not realize how much grieving has been lost in our culture and as an art. And actually, I found myself reading Claudia Rankine was actually one of my people to just help me process because people don't know what to do when it comes to death and grieving and actually using it productively to grow. And I think that and to heal. And I think in some ways, what you're pointing out is that there's this work of grieving is still ahead of us, and art is going to testify to this, no matter whether it gets recognized or not by the wider society. Art will have, many artists will have no choice but to speak to the signs of the times, as Nina Simone so amazingly said. I want to say to all of you, as we move into things, we do have some questions. We're going to get to your questions. They're wonderful questions so far. We're going to start to move through our panelists for a bit, but you can please, you can put your questions in. And also there's a comment section that you can place your comments into. And if our panelists are off the clock, they might respond to a question or two, as Sabrina just did. But we will try to get to all your questions, and we're so grateful that you're here. I want to turn to Sabrina because I have been a fan of Sabrina's for a long time, since coming here, and I've seen her working with issues around grieving, issues around African-American identity, and issues around the way art engages in a kind of storytelling, and doing it in multiple media. So not just your 2D is unbelievable. You have an incredible hand, incredible eye, and also your performance art is mesmerizing, truly mesmerizing. So Sabrina, what do you see as how does this past pandemic and season of protest, how does this affect your practice and your work?
Thank you. Thank you for your compliments, by the way. I call this time, you know, even though we're in a pandemic, I also say that we are also experiencing pandemonium during a pandemic. And so artists, and, you know, because that's my language, my tribe, we interpret, you know, we're the scribes, if you will. In Egypt, they were the ones who wrote the stories. And so I consider myself a scribe in documenting, as Elizabeth is talking about, like, you know, just my emotions about life. And as I sit here in my eyes and my mind record things, I'm asking myself questions about, how does it feel to be in this seat? How does it feel to be in this body? How does it feel to bear witness to these times? And so my work has always been about the pandemonium of life, and also being still in the midst of all of the chaos, learning how to meditate. You know, I grew up in a praying house, you know, they were fundamentalist, but learning how to just meditate and be still and then see what's there. It's like being on an airplane when they give you the talk about, if we are going to crash, here's some things you can do. The mask will come down. The most important thing to do is save yourself first, because then you can help others. And so for me, as I bear witness and I interpret the pandemonium in the pandemic, I am affected by all of these things. And I feel that it's important for me to share my voice, my visual voice, so that I can hopefully, maybe for those who are interested in listening and seeing what I have to say and perform, to share ways of being compassionate. You know, you can be empathetic, but you can be compassionate. And so that's my message with my work, not just, you know, with the Blackbird series talking about Black bodies, Black death, Black violence. Everything that I see from my perspective is coming from a nurturer's perspective. Like, you know, not all of the children that I cry over are my children that I have had. However, I think about the teachers in the communities who may not have birthed these children, but taught them, and the counselors and the neighbors, and they become family in that way, like earth mothers. And I start to think about like the little girl, Ayanna Jones, like what was it like for her family?
Yeah.
What was it like for not just her mother, but her siblings, her grandparents, her aunts and her uncles. And I started to draw these pictures of these people in my head and in my heart. And then I started to think I can no longer copy their faces. Like I stopped, I used to copy their faces from newspaper articles. And then I felt that there was so much anguish as I was painting, I was crying, as I was drawing, I was crying. And then I started thinking like, what is my superpower? What can I say about it? And I want people, you know, because we have access so much now with the news, the media, on our phones, on our tablets, it's just overwhelming. And it becomes so many names. And I started using too many to hashtag.
Right.
I can't remember, like soon as just recently, I helped Sydney James, who is an amazing muralist.
Yeah, love her work.
Malice Green, again, as if he was a stone angel on the wall. And she asked me to come and write the names of those from Detroit that were murdered violently. And so Malice Green is holding this scroll, and I became, again, the writer of the names. And just thinking about, soon as we finished the mural on Thursday, there was another death. And I was like, I'm just going home. And these are just the ones that we witnessed, that we know about, that we're told about. And so as Elizabeth talked about, you know, we're going to start seeing poems and books about the pandemic, the COVID. I lost my father on April 28th to COVID. And I haven't done an art piece about my father, but I feel like the more I do art, because he was an artist, I'm dedicating that ability from him. So in his honor, I have to keep creating. So I don't have to do a painting about him that says COVID. But, you know, people have asked questions, and there's been newspaper articles written about his contribution to this place. And I'm thinking, like, if I don't practice as an artist, then I'm not honoring the talent that he gave me. So I'm going to keep going with the Blackbird series, and that is really using the raven and the crow as a metaphor for Black bodies. When you think a group of crows, it is called a murder of crows. When you think of a group of ravens, it is called a conspiracy or an unkindness of ravens. So those two birds will often come in my work, where I'm just thinking about, you know, what it's like to have a nest, which is your body, your womb, and what it's like to not have that child come back home. Whether that child's name is George Floyd or Ayanna Jones or Malice Green, or no matter how old they are, they were important to someone and not important to someone else. And so for me, when I do the Blackbird series, I'm just thinking about those lives and how I can honor them and how I can share the idea of compassion. And so many people now are jaded by these deaths because they happen so often. And when they happen so often, you'll hear people go, well, what about Black on Black crime? And what about this? And I'm like, somebody's dead. Somebody is mourning. And we should all be affected by it. Somebody was not important to somebody enough so that they took their life. And somebody else will go home to their family. And so when I'm thinking about those things and those communities, I'm just thinking like, I can't stop doing my work because I'm not done yet. And so I'm not just really thinking about pandemonium in life, but I'm thinking of mourning, and I'm thinking of loss, and I'm thinking of life and how important life is. and how short it is. And so I talked to my 19-year-old who had never experienced death before. And as I was mourning my father, she didn't know how to comfort me. And she was like, Mom, nobody's ever died. I've never experienced this. And I forgot, like, I just didn't even think about that. She has never experienced death. And so I had to stop mourning to be her mother and to comfort her and to tell her in that moment of crying, I need you to look at me. And I said to her, I said, from the moment you were born, from the moment you could understand me, I told you that we were dying from the moment you were born. No one ever talks about the cycle of life in terms of we're born, then we die. Sorry about Max. He's very happy.
Yeah. There's actually a fifth panelist, right? You know.
Right, exactly. But I had to share with her the idea that there is a life cycle. You are born, people are excited that you're here, you don't care, you live, and then there's a space in between death, and then you die. But what's important is what you do while you're here. What will your legacy be? Whose lives will you change? Whose lives will you enhance? What will you leave? And so I had to stop crying just to say that to her. And then I felt like yoga. I mean, I felt like Yoda, right? I was like, that was really good. I don't know where I got that from, but it felt good to say because there is a cycle and death will happen, but we don't have to help it.
Yeah, let's take a look at your art because I want you to just walk through a couple of your pieces because I thought that we brought those in and I want people to get an idea of some of the work you're doing. And we're about to put this through. And as we kind of go, this is the Blackbird series. You started this in 2014, is that right?
I probably started in 2012 with my Blackbird series. And so I started to do these doily pieces with the portraits. And I could no longer paint the portraits of these beings that, you know, I was just lamenting over. And then I started painting birds. And I've been interested in birds for so long. And then I started researching blackbirds and then researching crows and ravens and seeing how they were in poetry. But I also have a background in performance art. And sometimes for me, it is not just doing the 2D work, but when you do a performance piece, it's a visceral experience. Sometimes inside a white cube space that I call galleries, but sometimes it can be outside. And it engages the viewers in a different way. And so this is Jennifer Harge, who is a performance artist, very much like Billy Mark, and uses her body and dance. So she was, I don't know if you've read Toni Morrison's Beloved.
Yes, well, and also to say a little bit more about Jennifer Harge, I mean, part of she was doing, before Sidney James was doing that mural, she had an incredible piece where she was reading through every single name of the high profile victims of police violence who are African American, and it was an incredible piece that she had 3 different dancers working on it. So she's been doing this a lot in her work, and I am familiar with this. Is a great collaboration.
Thank you. So she is in the nest, and I think of her as very much like the child that would be in Beloved, the spirit of the child who is no longer going to return to the nest. And so underneath the nest, you'll see the blackbirds, the doilies, and then there are some portraits of some of the folks who, the beings from here who are no longer going to be able to return to the nest because of violent death. And so I've been doing quite a bit of these pieces that are on vellum. So when you put them in the light, you can kind of see through them. And I wanted them to be the spirit of the blackbird, almost as if they were shot. And then I have a lot of gold dipped feathers talking about, again, the spirit of the blackbird. That definitely the crow, a murder of crows, or conspiracy or an unkindness of ravens. And so these are as if they've been shot. Just, you know, when people would go hunting, they would say pull and then they would shoot. And so it could be anybody at any time, but they're black bodies that we are just counting. And like I said, there are just too many names to hashtag. And so this what
Oh,
you're seeing.
yeah,
And
this
this
is,
is a large raven that I did recently for a show at Madonna University, and it was called Why You Want to Fly, Blackbird, which is a song that Nina Simone sang. And I'm just talking again about just being that, that empty space, the womb, whether it's the nest or the home or just the neighborhood or the school, that this being or the job or any will never get to go back home.
this is such a rich, and we could maybe pull back from the screen share now. This is such a rich review of your work, and it's so powerful, and I'm so grateful for it. Some of the connections I see you doing is compassion as a form of self-care, which is so key for people to heal from things, and that's such a wonderful way you've moved that into your practice. And then also the kind of art is as memory, and art is as mourning, and art is as it reminds me a little bit of because you're at the DIA, you'll know this piece well. There's an incredible piece by Alison Saar, who is to her father, where there's a mourning piece. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Yes, that's an incredible piece that I do see a lot of there's also a lot of interaction in your work with ritual as well.
I definitely think of, it's not just in my work, it's just in my everyday being. Like I have a ritual when I get ready to eat. Because of the pandemic, I am home. I no longer have breakfast. I have break slow. I sit down and I write in my gratitude journal about what I'm thankful for every day. And then what I look forward to tomorrow. And it's a small little page, right? It's not that big, so I write until I run out of the lines. And then for the next day, I have a very small 2 sentences, because there is a saying that says, if you live in the past, you'll be depressed. If you live in the future, you'll be anxious. But if you live in the moment, you'll be at peace. And so I don't want to put too much on what's going to happen tomorrow, because I don't know. But what I look forward to, and I wrote in my gratitude journal, was having this conversation today, and you all sharing your space with me so I could share my ritual space with you. So my ritual space is eating, feeding myself, and also what I feed myself, not just food, but what I listen to, what I hear, the smells around me. So I'll light an incense. I won't turn the television on. Actually, I don't have a television. My brother left it here, but so I don't know how to just get all the channels, but I have access because I have a laptop, and I have cell phones, and I have an iPad. I have to be very concerned about what I'm consuming here, 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 and here. And so making sure that my senses are right, and I'm being mindful of the steps that I take, and that I'm bringing peace and being peace. And so with my artwork, I think it is important that I say it is my superpower. It is part of my ritual, even though I may not be on a canvas in the studio, but creating a meal, putting on my clothes, washing myself and bathing in rose petals, and putting jasmine oil in the tub, and living like my paintings, like adding color to my life and joy in every moment I can. Otherwise, I would just be sad all the time.
That is such a beautiful way. I want to turn to Wayne Brown, and we're making a shift here to arts organizations. And as I said to Wayne before we went into this webinar formally, a place like MOT, Michigan Opera Theater, has been so much on my mind because of the incredible visionary work that was done when David DeCara kind of originated this company and had the vision to establish the Opera House, that it would be a place that lifted up diversity in opera, and that tried to create an opera that would actually reflect the diversity of the city. And one of the challenges that an opera house faces much like a church, is that the way that we heal is we congregate. We come together and we're around each other, right? And so the part of which makes this pandemic painful is that we haven't had the ability to congregate in a powerful way, to see something incredible, like your annual Too Hot to Handle or any of the work that you do. What are the pressures that arts organizations are under now? Question one. Question two, what are the responsibilities of arts organizations?
Thank you, Bill, so much. And I have to comment, Sabrina, how inspiring your words
I know, right?
convey. And to, I'm moved. And thank you so much. And thank you, Bill, for enabling us to join you in this forum. And when I think about your specific point of the work that David DeChiara created in 1971 to create an opera company in Detroit 4 years after the riots, it was a bold move. It was focused both on the art form and the community. And for David, the two worked hand in hand. There are those who thought that perhaps he should create an opera company in the suburbs. But for him, it was about community. It was about making a declarative statement that the community would take notice. And all of his work reflected that decision, both on stage and off. Your specific question relative to some of the challenges that opera companies across the country, and in some places, I must say, in various parts of the world, struggle with, along with orchestras and other performing arts organizations, reminds me of an article by Jan Daly. It took place on May the 1st in the Financial Times. The author reminds me that live performing arts are all about shared artistic experiences with artists and audiences alike. In his specific words, I quote, "There's little to beat hearing great music in a throbbing crowd or a rapt and silent group of listeners. Watching fine theater with a sharp and discerning audience. Feeling the collective gasp when a dancer leaps. It's all part of what we love about performance culture." And to the author's message as it relates to the Opera House, I will add the impact of hearing an extraordinary tenor singing Nathan Dormer live. It's an experience that is hard to match. Now, Daly goes on to say that, and for performers themselves, our participation actually creates, or might I say, inspires, the thing they do. A writer can write alone. A painter can paint in isolation. But a dancer dancing alone really is the sound of one hand clapping. In essence, performers and live audiences are codependent. One of the great challenges, I would say, that we currently experience is that the art making by the artists is void of that in-person experience as a result of the pandemic that we are now experiencing. I've talked with so many artists who certainly participate in performances at home, performances in isolation, performances on digital platforms, which enable them to connect, but there's that missing element. It's the absence of audience. And as we think about all of the performances that have been canceled, whether it's in Detroit or beyond, it is the artists who feel the void. In the same way, audiences likewise feel that void. We're in the business of performing arts, in terms of a measure of success is a high percentage of capacity in the space. At the moment, there's a deafening sound in the Opera House and in so many theaters across the country. Likewise, there's that absence for performers who are unable to be able to share their art in an in-person setting that deprives them of a true connection. So one of the issues that we currently face has to do with how we navigate this moment, how we entertain alternate platforms until such time as we can once again create in-person experiences. I want to segue to the reference that Sabrina made relative to the inspiration that comes from authors, from writers, in terms of the role that opera company can play. It's about storytelling. It's about taking those experiences to the performance stage and bringing to an audience the essence of a story through a musical art form, where words, where movement, where lighting, where sound and voice align to present an authentic experience that would not otherwise be captured through a text alone. That's the power. And as Toni Morrison's reference that Sabrina raised relative to Beloved, it was David DiChiara who brought Margaret Garner to Detroit. The story of Margaret Garner, inspired by Toni Morrison in Beloved, took place on the stage of Michigan Opera Theater, on the stage in the Detroit Opera House, now known as the David DiChiara Center for the Performing Arts, for Detroit, but also for the nation and the world. It is the reference that's been made by the most recent Pulitzer Prize winning composition, Central Park 5, that Anthony Davis brought a true American story to the Opera House stage. It is the ability to capture those experiences of our time, which creates an enormous responsibility for those of us who are presenters, those of us who provide a stage for the artists to carry their messages forward, to both pay attention and make sure the artists have the support that they need to provide that experience for them, and in turn, experience for our audiences. So when I think about the pandemic at the moment, and I think about it as all of us do every day, we try to say, how can we take full advantage of this pause, as I would describe as perhaps an intermission between acts, to be reflective of what's to come, what's next? How do we prepare for that next act? And it requires enormous observation, patience, being alert, because what will follow following the pandemic, in essence, is what will define us in this era for something we have never known heretofore. And we take that with great responsibility and great interest to make sure that when we return to the stage and provide that in-person experience between artists and audiences alike, that we will have something definitive to say that talks about what's next.
That is so wonderfully put, and I really appreciate that idea of pause. I mean, when I look at from my perspective as a pastor, what opera, and if you look at it in terms of the history of music, opera comes out this is my history, no one else's, so I own all the mistakes. Opera begins in salons as a kind of parallel liturgy to what was going on in churches in the West. And I sometimes believe that the reason why that happened is there was the need to tell a more complex story than a church liturgy was providing at the time. And at the time, the liturgies were very rote and they were very restrictive and they're very rigid. And so opera provided the opportunity to tell a more complex story and to open up pathways for how stories unfold in ways that we don't understand. And so is that a fair assessment of kind of the vocation of opera is to create ritual space that is almost as transformative as going to a church service, but it's focused on opening up pathways and seeing complexities. So for example, in Don Giovanni, you'll have this, I mean, no one will ever figure out exactly what Mozart's really trying to say about music and being a flesh and blood being and also being a statue. There's this, like, what does it mean between having a heart of stone and a heart of flesh and music? And this is to get back to, Elizabeth's point as well, that, there's no, art is not a puzzle that you can like figure it out and like, oh, that's what they're doing, So opera does that. Can you say a little bit about that?
Certainly. And I think it's interesting that you reference similarities that may exist between a church experience or synagogue, mosque,
Yes,
or an experience that one might that might occur in an opera house, and it's important to make sure that we are paying attention in terms of takeaways from our audiences. It's very likely that two individuals going to an opera production will leave with very different takeaways.
yeah,
And we must be mindful of that. We must be able to embrace those different perspectives,
yeah,
and not just the critic who
yeah,
provides a particular point of view. But that's the beauty of opera. And that's also, it's important to understand that an opera production is a unique experience. It's a one-time occasion when you have a particular cast of performers performing a work that has clearly been prescribed by both the composer and librettist, but it's that interpretive nature. It's about the space, it's about the time, it's about the energy that you bring to a performance as to what you will take away. And I suspect that there are those who attend Christ Church Cranbrook at the end of a service may offer different takeaways from what you have provided.
I can bear witness to that countless times. Yes, positive and negative, and
Well, different, sometimes different. And in that regard, I believe it's just important now that adds to your second part of your question as to how we pivot, how do we prepare for that next act, that we're mindful of our limitations. For example, when the opera house is not producing work, there is little to sustain us. We do not have the benefit of the audience. We do not have the benefit of the audience because we don't have the benefit of performance of program. And therefore we do not have an organization temporarily. So we long for that end of this particular pause to be over. In the opera house, we're accustomed to 20-minute intermissions or maybe 25 minutes. It's been 3 months. And we all look forward to the end of that pause. That having been said, it requires all of us to take note of the moments that we're experiencing. How do we remain connected with audiences that we serve? Digital platforms is one aspect. And I would also say social distancing in outdoor settings is another. But the whole notion of creating social distancing in an opera house designed for 2,700 people that would be limited to 25% of capacity, it's a very different energy.
yeah.
So trying to make sure that we can look forward to that time when we can re-engage on a larger scale will be, in the meantime, we will take steps to achieve maximum benefit through those digital platforms in order to bridge the tide, to bridge this gap.
I really appreciate, and with all three of our panelists so far, I want to say, I feel like I should have follow-ups with just you so I could keep on going down, because this is just amazing what's happening. I want to turn to Rachelle and first of all, so honored to have you here. Such an admirer of your work. I am so excited with your new position, and I look forward to finding ways to collaborate as we go through this pause together. And I want to somehow narrow down your incredible areas of expertise to just one comment that you make in your book, where you actually have this link, and I'm just going to invite you to kind of just continue to write it in a different way as you speak. But you say that, one of the things about the fight of Black people to be recognized and treated as human beings, equal members of the human family, was not only in addition to protest, insurrection, and social movements, but also to the unyielding assertion of their own voice and to speak from their own experience. And then you go to identify not only Richard Allen, who I'm a huge admirer of, and Absalom Jones, but also you move into Gwendolyn Brooks, the poet, James Baldwin, the writer, Toni Morrison, John Coltrane, Nina Simone, and Motown. And you write that the authentic voice of African Americans, the progeny of enslaved Africans and their descendants who refused to remain the unheard. As you enter into your position as the Director of Arts and Culture for the city of Detroit, what voices are you lifting up, and what voices need to be lifted up? Oops, you're still on mute. Hold on. Got it. No.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here. I'm not only just honored to be on this panel, but I'm honored by the words that I've heard. And before I answer your question, I have to say to Sabrina that what she said should be set to music. I was so moved, and my history parallels that of Detroit, where there was a time where I lived in the past. And then I woke up and realized I needed to live in the future. And then I really woke up and realized that I needed to live in the now. And a part of my job now is living in the now. My job is to lift up voices past, present, and future. I am the keeper of a new flame that once went out in Detroit. Artists in Detroit went unnurtured in a formal and official way. So I'm charged with changing that. Art is everything. It's survival. Art is relief. Art is a means of transportation from one feeling to another, from one generation to another. Art is birthed from pain. Art is birthed from joy. But more than anything, it is the greatest representation of life that we have and that we have had. And because great art is both immediate and lasting, fantastic art is both, which is why you have things now that we have enjoyed for hundreds of years. So our greatest job from generation to generation is to keep that art and to make sure that we are lifting up those voices and to ask ourselves every time, every generation, every piece of art, every work of art, every performance, every word, every song, whose pain, whose relief, whose survival, whose joy. When we talk about pandemics, and we do need to talk a little bit about it because we're dealing with two pandemics now, a medical pandemic and a racial pandemic. When we see images from the last medical pandemic, and I'm not going to talk about them, I just briefly want people to see that they actually are art. And it is some of the art from pain. This is Camp Funston, Kansas, where the virus originated in the 1910s. You look at that and you don't want to enjoy that, but you want to feel something about it. And it's the same with another piece from 1918, a crowded sleeping area on the drill hall floor of the main barracks at the Naval Training Station in San Francisco. And you think about the fact that there are bodies lined up like that. It is painful art. It is something that you watch without joy. You watch it because it's necessary. And it's amazing that we all sort of turned to Yeats tonight because I want to talk about the racial pandemic as well. And it was the same words. I was stunned when you did this, you and Elizabeth both did this, but The phrases that stuck with me: the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely revelation is at hand. The revelation that we're talking about in the spiritual world is not the revelation that people are having now, where they have lost. This ceremony of innocence lost has happened from people seeing African Americans for the first time, seeing the pain and the struggle and the things that have been complained about for some time for the first time. And I remember when Ava DuVernay titled her piece on the Central Park boys who were railroaded, When They See Us. When they see us, it is different. When you see art through a certain set of eyes or a certain set of circumstances, it changes who you are, and it changes what that is and what that means. And I think that for people to really understand how you bring words and music together, you have to remember that some of the most beautiful things that you're seeing can come from some of the most horrendous circumstances. And that brings me to my favorite song in all of the history of music, which was first written as a poem by James Weldon Johnson and performed by children at first, you know, back in 1900 for Abraham Lincoln's birthday of all things. And his brother put it to music so it could be a song, and then the NAACP adapted it. But every single time anybody starts the first strains of "Lift Every Voice and Sing," that stops me. I don't care where I am. I don't care what's going on. I stand immediately. I need to sing the whole thing because I want people to remember where that came from. They're singing a song, but it's full of faith that the dark past has taught us and hope that the present has brought us. This is not a happy song, but this is a song of perseverance, and it is one of the best pieces of art ever. So the answer to your question is, I am the keeper of voices, past, present, and future for our art. That means music, dance, fashion, opera, definitely opera with my friend Wayne. Every single type of way that people express themselves, that's my job.
That is so beautiful. And James Weldon Johnson, I one of the things I like to remind people, this is embarrassing, but he was Episcopalian. He was a member of the Episcopal Church. And so we don't have, you know, we have to just claim our own when we have them, you know, like you're a good marshal also. I just want to point that out. Anybody ever wonder? You know, it's I'll stop now. But yes, I think that that's a wonderful thing. We're getting a lot of discussion about monuments and memorials. And one of the things that I've said to you earlier is that, and one of the ways I would distinguish for the audience, the difference between a monument and a memorial, and here I'm relying on art theorists, this is not original, is that, you know, memorials tend to be complex statements of a shattering experience that somehow trace how people have grieved and put their lives together. And so you have something like Maya Lin's Vietnam memorial. And then a monument tends to actually create a very univocal ideological statement in which the person is not depicted as they were in real life, but as they were in a kind of idealized past. And it seems to me that that Detroit has a lot of monuments, but we seem to be under memorialized as a city. And it seems that when I look at the art, the ferment of artists in Detroit, and you know, Sabrina and I were mentioning a few together. In addition, obviously Tyree Guyton, obviously Alami Dobbles. There are so many others. Cindy James, you mentioned. Jennifer Harge, I think, has done great work. You know, all of these people are all speaking about memorialization and the kind of challenges to telling that story truthfully in a way that is also healing. Is that do you see that distinction? Does that make sense, or how do you approach these challenging times?
It does make sense. And I can tell you the unfortunate choice that was made long ago was not to understand that monuments belong in cemeteries.
Mm.
That's where all of them should be, so that the people who want to celebrate their memory of whatever that was or whoever that person was can do that. The public places for memorial are different, and you cannot force an entire place and all types of people to relish and memorialize something that is not memorializable. I think that that is the challenge. If you have someone who has caused great pain and you put up a monument to them that people who were caused that pain have to walk by and look at every day, you are not doing a public service. That doesn't mean that can't exist somewhere. It can exist in a backyard. It can exist in a, in a special place. But cemeteries, not parks, where children will have to ask, oh, who was that? Well, that was someone who felt that Black people were not equal to white people. That should not be a part of our public art. That should not be a part of trying to memorialize something and revise what it was. I think that's a part of the problem. So my first instinct, of course, was when people started taking down the Confederate statues was, well, what's going to happen to them? Because if people paid a lot of money for them, as the Daughters of the American Revolution did for so many of the Confederate statues, where are they going to go? And my first thought after that was cemeteries.
There may be, I totally agree. And I think that one question that gets asked a lot of me, because I tend to be in an agreement with you, and I do love art, and people ask questions, they say, well, where does it stop? And I'm wondering what your answer would be to that. I know my answer, and I'm afraid I'll share my answer if you want to.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So when I visited Havana, Cuba a few years ago, and I was honored to meet with a diplomat, there were a group of us journalists meeting with a diplomat to talk about what was going on in the continuing revolution. And I asked her the same question I'd asked several people during the day. My God, when is the revolution going to be over? And she said, when everything that must be changed is changed, that's when it's over. So the answer is when it's all gone.
Yeah. And for me, I think that there's gonna, I think as a country, we need to generate a repertoire of interacting with the monuments we have. I think some of them have to go. And then I think some of them need to be, there needs to be ways to interact with them by putting up a parallel piece, installation that somehow interacts with it and complexifies it. Because
Well,
yes.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say the type of thing that you're imagining, for instance, would be two generals, one from the north and one from the south, on their steeds going at each other. And there's a plaque to let you know who won and who lost. That would be educational and informative for children. But to put one of them up and not the other, as if one was more important or one won when they didn't, is misleading and disingenuous.
Yes, I mean, and also what I'm thinking of is also in Germany, they, at some point, the country had a point where it didn't take down memorials that that spoke to its imperial past, but they invited contemporary artists to actually create space around it that I thought was really, really healthy. And so I think there are other models for how to do this that can be constructive. And having said that, I don't have the power to say that. I don't think anybody does at this point. But it would be interesting to see that kind of. And I don't want to. I'm not sure if I wouldn't want to even talk about a single monument today, because I'm sure that you'll say something. I'll say, oh yeah, that's right. Let's take that down, and then I'll get in trouble and I'll get lots of emails. So but I think it's a key thing. So memorialization, though, is its own kind of practice, and it's its own kind of, has its own integrity. And I'm wondering, is that something that you want to place resources behind or lift up?
I think when it's deserved. I think that there are things that are obviously deserved, and there are things that will be controversial. There are things that we must remember about our history in Detroit and in Michigan, whether they're positive or negative. I just think how you do that is very important.
Yeah.
Everyone wasn't a president of the United States, so everybody doesn't get the same treatment. You can't treat someone who wasn't a president like they were a president. I mean, that's just like saying we're going to take, I'm not going to name a name, but we're going to take this guy just because we like him and put him on our own version of Mount Rushmore. You wouldn't do that. You have to earn it in some way. So I think that there's a way to to be memorialized and to be accurately memorialized, and that be okay.
And just to say a little bit about that, you know, Richard Allen, for example, who you mentioned, founder of the AME Church, there's a biographer that has written, and I believe it's true, if he had been white, he would have been a founding father.
Absolutely.
There would have been monuments to him from the beginning. The response he led in Philadelphia to handle an epidemic of yellow fever, in many ways saved the city.
But this thing, Bill, about art being a living thing, being something that does not end. When I go to Mother Bethel in Philadelphia, I feel the spirit of Richard Allen. He will not be claimed as a founding father who signed a declaration and who gets credit for what he did. But that doesn't mean we can't memorialize him now, because we understand how great that was.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And this is, again, folks, we're just scratching the surface of some really important conversations, but I want to get to your questions now and to start asking them. And someone has invited you, Deirdre Bonds, invited you to keep singing the James Weldon Johnson.
That is my dear friend.
I think
No, I'm not going to do that.
I know. I understand that. There's a couple of questions that I think we've dealt with, and one of them is that, you know, what makes art successful as a way of storytelling? I feel like we're starting to address that. Another one that I want to say that I think is really key is, how can we consciously use art to impact society? Can art be used as such a tool on a large scale? How can you make art that speaks to people? What is the process behind making art to do so? And how can we know that art is having an impact? That's a huge, powerful set of questions that I invite. And yes, we got to, oh, you were just pulling with me.
I just have one answer for that one.
All right.
Just beings, and I want to say not necessarily the culturally enhanced folks who will go into a gallery or go into a museum, but sometimes an artist has to take the work to the people. That's where public murals and memorial pieces work the best. For me, when I was painting a mural on in North End, behind the old Northern High School, which was turned into Detroit International Girls Academy for Young Women, which is now going to be the home of Detroit Public Schools. But I think Northern was the first high school, and then Central was the second high school in the city of Detroit in terms of the history of schools. So I did a mural in North End, and it's like hardly any houses around. And as I was doing the mural, people kept walking by. They're like, "Oh, you an artist? Oh, are you doing this? What man is doing this? Who's helping you do this?" And I'm like literally on the scaffold or the lift, and I'm holding the brushes. I'm literally painting it. But they had so many questions. The firemen from the firehouse walked down and they were like, "Who's helping you do this? Who are you working for?" And I was like, "I'm the artist." But I think if we take the art in the communities where sometimes the blue collar workers just go to work, and then on the weekends they go to the park and they just hang out with their family. If we take it to the communities, then they get to hear voices and stories. Like there was a time when I think opera was in different parks, and it was sort of like to get you excited about the different shows that were going to happen. And they were in some of the smaller parks around Detroit downtown. That was amazing to me, because people who were walking by or on the bus, they got an opportunity to see and engage in something that, like, in their minds, they may not think the opera house is for them. But I mean, like, if you don't know, you don't know that it's a beautiful experience and it's for everyone. Like, this is your opera house. This is your DIA. Like the DIA has the DIA Away, where they'll take a piece and they'll put it on the wall in Flint, or they'll put it in Pontiac or in Saginaw, just to kind of get you to see this is part of the collection, but this belongs to you. And so I think if we're looking for those stories and how people can see or hear them, sometimes we have to take the art away from the white cube space and the museum. Like Billy Mark did, he did a piece where he was on the median on 8 Mile, and he was talking about like what it's like to feel pulled in two different directions, whether you're biracial or whether you live in one community versus the other community, but you're either way, you're being pulled. And 8 Mile is that median. And so he did his performance piece on the median in 8 Mile.
That was Wrestle. That was the
Yes,
most amazing piece ever. It was lyrical, it was humorous, it was the best performance art. It was amazing. I want to continue along with that because, you know, I think about what you were doing, and if we place it in the category of street art, Detroit does have an impressive archive of world-class street artists going into Brightmoor, going into Hamtramck, and having their work equally shown in the DIA and on a house in Hamtramck, like Swoon did a couple of years ago. You know, I do think, I will say that Detroit has an incredible map of art that's in the community. I want to ask Rachelle to maybe flesh out, though, there seems to be two things that need to happen with art. One is to build capacity because art curriculums are starting to be squeezed in public schools, and people are not getting the opportunity to grow artistically as part of their school, and to lift up the artists that have, you know, one of the challenges that happened in Detroit is when you go through the bankruptcy, your private market collapses. And then the people who have the collectors, they tend to collect from beyond Detroit. And so the first class art that's in Detroit doesn't have the same value in the eyes of the collector. So it seems like that's where public art has to go to actually lift up the artists as well. Can you speak to those two responsibilities?
Sure. Well, I can tell you the most important skill that I bring to this new job is from my old job as a columnist, where it is my job to write about the great, to celebrate, to persuade. And what I want to do is make sure that people understand how world-class our talent is here in Detroit. We have some of the most amazing creatives, and nothing breaks my heart more than talking to someone and them saying, well, someone just hired this person to do this. And they said, well, from Los Angeles or Chicago. And they said, well, I can do it, but the person who taught me is right there in Detroit. And that's horrible because that shows a lack of awareness of how great we are. So that's one of my jobs. The second thing, and I'm so glad that Sabrina mentioned it, is one of the tenets, one of the things that I have decided will be one of the three things that I do is to use arts and culture as catalysts for neighborhood growth, where everything I do is going to be out in the neighborhoods. We're taking art to the people who literally should be able to appreciate it the easiest. And that also means that even as much as we try to push art back into the schools, and the superintendent, Dr. Nikolai Viti, is doing that, we can't let that be the only thing we're doing. I want to make sure we're providing things for young people everywhere. So if they do get it in school and they are able to return that, then that's great, but they will also have it someplace else. So I think that what we have to do is understand as a community how great we are, how much we have here. I'm so impressed by your knowledge as you've talked with us tonight about all the artists you know and all the things that you are aware of. Everybody should be aware of those things. And let me make sure to give everybody my phone number because I do it every time I speak. It's 313-720-1016. I did an interview on Channel 4 and they said, is that your real cell phone number? And I said, yes, anybody can call me. Chiefy called me this morning at 7 a.m. because he had an idea. If we can communicate with each other and create some kind of symbiosis of love around what we have, we can accomplish anything with our art.
One of the things that you did recently that I was and one artist who I think needs to be lifted up is Hubert Massey. Because he actually is someone who bridges the monumental and the memorial in a way that I think is really, really important. And you did an exercise, you sponsored an exercise where Hubert Massey did a incredible piece, Power to the People, that was also painted by the youth. And I think you brought a clip with us. Maybe we could see that clip now, if we can bring it for people to see.
I can tell you that the most important thing I did was listen to young people. We got a request for them to paint. They said, we'd like to paint Black Lives Matter on a street. And I said, well, I'm going to get 20 kids together and we will put out an open call to artists. And we had 35 artists to respond to that open call, and none of them responded to making money because I didn't put the amount of money for the commission in the call. And they chose the artists. And one of the young ladies who judged said, well, we're Detroit, we're different. We don't want to paint the same thing everyone else is painting. So they chose Mr. Massey without knowing that it was Hubert Massey, without knowing that it was Icon and one of our greatest muralists. They just loved his proposal and the fact that he had worked with youth for so long. So they chose Power to the People, and then found out that they got to have the amazing experience to work with someone very special and very renowned to create a bit of history on Lower Woodward, one of our major thoroughfares.
Wow, that is such an incredible piece, and it's so lovely and so just it's iconic. I really appreciate that. Let's go to I'm going to go to another question. Someone did mention, and I think it's important for me to say this, because I did send a note, and I'm very honored to have officiated at David DeCara's funeral and to know the DeCara family. And I know that today is Karen DeCara's birthday, and I want to pass on our deep love for Karen, who is nearby. I've been trying to keep in touch with her through this, and to their wonderful children. There's one question that is coming that is an incredible question. And it picks up on the idea of the title of the book you mentioned, They See Us. It seems that this assumes that the eyes and views that matter are of the majority population, especially when it comes to second pandemic. How do artists manage being seen and unseen? Is the purpose to get into people's vision, especially the majority population's vision, or is it to speak the truth, knowing that sometimes you are seen and heard and sometimes you are not?
I'm going to yield to Sabrina, who needs to be unmuted, because as an artist, she has had to deal with that. And then I'll say a word.
Well, you know, there's the word where the kids call them clout chasers, where you just want to be in front of the camera and you want all the accolades and you want all the awards. And at 52.9997, since my birthday is in August, no adult ever says 52 and a half. But in my journey to now, I have always thought that it is more important to be authentically truthful and who you are, and to forge forward with whatever message or story you have to say. And whether you have an audience or not, sometimes, and I think about therapists, like you have to go and talk to them because it's healing, but it's so that you can hear it outside of your head. And for me, when I am creating the pieces, I need to get them outside of my body, outside of my head, outside of my third eye, all the eyes. They have to be outside so that it becomes real. And then it is my truth. And so if I don't get paid $1 bajillion by Kresge or whomever, you know, and Toni Morrison, it got her a while before she finally got her award, right?
That's right.
I think because I watched the Toni Morrison special last night, but you know, you don't do things for awards. You just don't. You do them because it is the truth of who you are. And it's my voice. Now, maybe some other people might, but that's not true for me. I'm gonna go back on mute.
And Max was amazing. He was amazing how he kept himself. Rachelle, you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say, well, Sabrina just said it so well. Artists who are doing their work for truth, whether it's in song or dance or opera or paint or rock or metal, doing it for the passion of enjoy doing it and doing it to seek truth, usually are more successful than those who are doing it just to seek fame. Fame can be fleeting, and the things that are passionate remain.
Another question that's come our way, and this is such a rich conversation. I want to thank you all. Is it goes directly to you, Elizabeth, and I'm going to just rephrase it slightly as I read it. If art from the 1918 pandemic, if the work of literature after 1918 featured blood words or words of many other symptoms of the flu and symbols and images, as we just saw in the Yeats poem, then there is a correlation, it seems, between the symptoms of COVID with the I can't breathe, the ventilators, the lack of breath, the George Floyd death. And I just want to say, Kathy, that last few bit was that was poetic and beautiful. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm not sure better than that that sort of question phrased it. I think one of the things that happens with art is that art is also changes meaning all the time, right? So I said that I read a bunch of different literature differently after I had read about the influenza pandemic, but the same is true for COVID, right? That I think half the art at a 9/11 art exhibition was actually produced before 9/11. And it's just that you take two rectangles and you put them next to each other and they mean something very different, right? Before and after. So I think that art will continue to change and resonate, even if it wasn't sort of part of the original. And I do think that this idea of breath, right, and this idea of drowning is both metaphorically really rich, as well as sort of biologically true in both of these pandemics, as well as in the pandemic of racism. And one of the things I was reading earlier today that I just want to read a quotation of is a poet, a spoken word poet. This is one of the ways you get literature sort of out. Ifra Hussein, who's a Somali Canadian poet, she has a spoken word poem on the protests. But one of the things she says, and this reminds me of this question, and she's asking sort of what do we call these protests? And she gives all these different answers. And one of the things she says is, call it 3,000 poems trying to make metaphors out of the taking of Black breath. Right, so that's 3,000 poems trying to make metaphors out of the taking of Black breath, right? And this is what COVID is doing, and this is what we're seeing on the streets. And then she says, call this 1,000,000 roses thrown into the air, and all of them descending individually onto the graves of Black bodies. Right, so those two images, there's art that speaks to both of these pandemics, the COVID and the pandemic of racism, sort of melded together with this idea of breath.
That is such an incredible connection, and I really appreciate you making that. That was beautiful. I want to put one more question to Wayne, and then I think we're unfortunately going to have to close, which is, the question that was asked, Wayne, is, have new forms of performance that you haven't thought of coming forward. We've all had to embrace technology and different connections. Has opera adjusted in different ways that wasn't imagined before? And of course, in the history of opera, I worked for a university president who had a PhD in opera, in music and musicology, and focused on opera. And, in the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, there's these different iterations of opera. Is opera going to enter into a new way of being, where you don't gather in a large hall, but maybe have a different kind of medium?
Oh, absolutely. It's a living experience. We're taking form of multiple platforms. Content is also continues to emerge. Just prior to the pandemic, Michigan Opera Theater was prepared to present an opera in jazz by the artist Terrence Blanchard, who is the artist in residence for jazz with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. We were in the midst of rehearsals, and unfortunately that was one of the most difficult calls, to go right to the rehearsal to say, "I'm sorry, we can't go on." That was a very disheartening experience. But I think, well, as I mentioned earlier, from the Central Park Five, from the Opera X by Anthony Davis, there are just so many ways in which the opera art form can embrace the wide range of musical expression and forces, and you can expect going forward that we will make sure that the Detroiters and the greater Detroit region will become the beneficiaries of those experiences.
I really want to thank each and every one of you. I feel like each of you did not get enough time to speak. I wish at the same time, I think we are going to follow up with conversations. This has been I can't imagine a more important conversation than the one we've had tonight. And it's because of each of you doing the incredible work that you do. And so I want to thank you for the bravery with which you get up out of bed every day and work on a piece of research, or to keep an organization afloat, or to start something up and lift up voices, or simply to do the work that God has put you on this earth to do. I want to thank you for doing that every day and for being such a witness to us. And I want to close with a brief invitation given by Sabrina. I want you to pray us out. Or whatever you need to do, just say it. And then we have our little debriefing afterwards, but just pray us out.
Okay, I just want to say, I have this kind of blessing that I give to myself and to others, and I like to say it to everybody here. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be healthy, and may you be at peace. I say it to myself, and I share it with all 4 of you and all 80 of those who are also here with us. And that is my prayer and my meditation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been so wonderful, and I'm so grateful for your work. And panelists will just have a quick debrief and Meredith has sent you the web link. Good night.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.